Globally, over 3 million people die every year of pulmonary embolism, or blood clots in the lungs. When the outflow in the lungs is stopped, it creates a sharp increase in pressure against which the heart has to pump. PE is a deadly disease that doesn't discriminate. It impacts everybody, old, young, black, white, or brown. This is the #1 cause of preventable in-hospital mortality. It's young, healthy journalists like David Bloom and top athletes like Serena Williams. This is also a leading cause of maternal mortality in this country. Despite this being a big, deadly, and actually very well reimbursed disease, we're living in the Stone Age when it comes to interventional tools today available to treat PE. Pulmonary embolism patients are generally identified in the emergency department. Once we've identified a PE, we risk stratify these patients into 3 groups. What we're doing is assessing their risk of hemodynamic or pressure-related decompensation. Will that increase in pressure be too much for the right ventricle to tolerate? Fortunately, most of these patients are going to be low risk. We can treat them with anticoagulation alone. On the other end of the spectrum, some of these patients are going to be very high risk. If they make it into the emergency department, they're decompensating before our eyes. These patients are treated with systemic thrombolysis, so clot-dissolving drugs given in a very large dose through a peripheral IV. These drugs are very effective at dissolving clot, but large doses can cause other complications such as bleeding in the brain. At Flow, we're focused on this intermediate risk patient population group. These patients are too sick for blood thinners alone, but they're not decompensating before you, so you have time to take them into the cath lab, and they're a good fit for catheter-based therapies. There are over 250,000 of these patients every year just in the US. Of these catheter-based interventions, there's 2 different approaches. The first is catheter-directed thrombolysis, where we use the same clot-dissolving drugs, typically TPA, with a much smaller dose infused over time directly into the pulmonary arteries. The other option is large bore thrombectomy, where we can go in and either mechanically or via aspiration remove the clot in a single session. It's important because there's a lot of heterogeneity in these patients. There are no 2 PE patients that are going to be the same. And both of these therapeutic approaches are incredibly important. At University of Chicago, we see these patients all the time. And if you look here, this patient on the left, you're going to see 1 large proximal clot. This is an opportunity where we want to, as we say, uncork the bottle, and this patient is a great fit for large bore thrombectomy. On the right-hand side, you see a patient that looks very different. They have some proximal clot, but lots of distal clot sprinkled throughout. This patient is a better fit for catheter-directed thrombolysis, where we can have a drug that goes in and cleans out all of those smaller vessels. And what we see in our experience at University of Chicago clinically, as well as in literature, is that most of these PE patients actually look more like this picture on the right. So we need a toolkit. We need both of these options to be able to take care of this patient group effectively. But what we've seen actually happen in the market is a lot of innovation being put into thrombectomy catheters. We have some great catheters that are out there and many more that are on the way. We have seen innovation stall in catheter-directed thrombolysis, where we've seen 1 new device in the last 20 years. This is the opportunity that we're pursuing at Flow Medical to create a next-generation thrombolysis catheter. What we see with the existing lytic catheters, we are missing the mark for these patients. These catheters barely touch the clot. They weren't actually designed for the venous system. And most importantly, they leave physicians having to guess how much drug to give each patient. What we see in practice for thrombolysis catheters are some physicians infusing for as little as 2 hours and others going up to 24 hours. What we know is that every patient is different. Some may need 2, some may need 24. The risk is if you give too little lytic, you're not actually treating the underlying problem. So you're leaving clot behind, which can then become chronic and be much more difficult to treat later on. On the other end, you don't want to give patients too much lytic and risk bleeding complications. At Flow, we believe for a disease killing more than 3 million people across the globe every year, these patients deserve more than guesswork. This is why our catheter was born. Our catheter was designed specifically for the pulmonary vascular anatomy with a novel infusion scaffold designed to penetrate clots and a precision medicine approach to Medtech, where we're able to use hemodynamic monitoring to tailor your dose to each patient. Let me show you how this works. As you unsheath the device, the scaffold expands. There are laser cut holes for your thrombolytic drug to come out. It's designed for femoral venous access, and the procedure starts by placing a wire into the pulmonary artery. We can perform high-pressure pulmonary angiograms through our device, so without needing to swap out devices, you can see exactly where you are and where you want to target your thrombolytic drug. You then advance the catheter through the first proximal clot. It's one skew that's adjustable in length, so you unsheath it to match the length of that thrombus. You can see we have a lot more surface contact with the clot, so we can lyse both large central clot while still sending thrombolytic agent downstream to go after the smaller vessels. The fiber optic sensor is what enables our precision medicine approach. We can track patient hemodynamics in real time, giving physicians for the first time ever the exact information they need to know on when to stop therapy for that patient. You then resheath the device and take it out. Now, our device is really, really cool, and I love showing that video, but our team is even better. My partners, Dr. Paul and Dr. Ahmed, are expert interventionalists who specialize in PE. They see over 450 of these patients every single year. I spent my career in early stage Medtech. This is my second University of Chicago spin out, and it has been a ton of fun to build this company and be back here at LSI with company number 2. JP and Oz came up with this concept in 2020 and incorporated the business in 2022. I've been with the team for the last year and a half, and we have been very, very busy. We've done 12.5 animals, gotten to design freeze, and this year we're going through a DV and getting ready to submit our IDE. A regulatory pathway is a 510K, but pulmonary embolism is a 510K that also requires clinical studies. So we'll be starting those clinical studies next year and pursuing our 510K in a few years. We've raised $6.5 million to date, and I'm here this week looking for a lead investor for a $12 million Series A round to fund our pivotal and take us through that 510K submission. Now, those of you in the audience may be saying, why now? Is this too late to be coming into the space? We all saw the biggest medtech deal of the year, Inari's acquisition by Stryker, which is an amazing data point for the space. I'm here to tell you that these are still early days for PE interventions. When we look at more advanced interventional markets like MI, 90% of these patients go into the lab and receive an intervention. For pulmonary embolism today, that's only 15 to 20%. The vast majority of patients who can benefit from any of these catheter-based interventions are still just receiving heparin. Why is that? There's great data in the field, but the data is single arm. When we look at the most studied advanced intervention, which is catheter-directed thrombolysis, these patients do better. There's lower mortality in hospital 30 and 90 day. We see improved right ventricular recovery versus anticoagulation alone with a similar safety profile. But there's only so far that any field can go with single-arm data. The time is now, and it's so exciting to be in this space. There are 4 major RCTs that are enrolling right now. There are 3 that are funded by industry, and 1 that's being funded by the NIH. All of these studies are comparing endovascular interventions to anticoagulation alone. So we're going to have that answer in 2 to 3 years, right as we are bringing our product to market. So we think our timing is spot on. I'd like all of you to imagine a world where when your loved one goes into the emergency department with a pulmonary embolism, we know exactly what to do, where the clot is, what device to use, and how much drug to give them. We'd love to have you join us on this journey. I'd love to meet with any of you that are interested. Thank you for your time.